Hi everyone, it's Ellen. For today's video, I wanted to share a tutorial for my favorite quick and easy sweater to sew that's great even for beginners who've never really done a whole lot of doll sewing before. And so first of all, you're going to need a pattern. The one I'm featuring in this video is by Yumi Studio, and I'll have it linked down below in the description. It is for Minifee size, but you can use this tutorial for any sweater of any size with any pattern, as long as it is a basic raglan sleeve sweater. For the material, I am using just a basic jersey knit that has some good stretch to it so it'll fit over the doll. And I'm going to be going over the basics of just cutting out your material and everything before you start sewing, so if you're familiar with this part, feel free to skip ahead. So I'm folding it in half here so that I can have a nice symmetrical style for the front and back, because the pattern calls for you to put the pattern right along a folded edge like that so that it's nice and even on both sides for your front and back. So when you go through and cut this part for the front, back, and sleeves, make sure you leave a little bit on the edge just outside of where the pattern ends. That will give you just enough room for when you are sewing that you have enough room for your seams. So for the next part, I'm going to be cutting out some of the edging, such as the cuffs and the collar and the bottom hemline. I'm using a very, very stretchy ribbed fabric, and for this one, you don't have to leave that bit around the edge like you did for the other material, because it is already built into the pattern for this specific pattern. So now that you have everything cut out, you are ready to go ahead and get started sewing. So I always start with the sleeves, and so for this one I go ahead and take them off of their pattern, of course, and make sure I identify the right side and the wrong side. So the right side will always be looking a little nicer, a little bit more finished than the wrong side, and so that is very, very important when you're sewing. I'm not going to get too much into it for this tutorial, but just so you know. And I'm going to get started by attaching the sleeve cuff to the sleeve itself. I'm folding it over, this time wrong side to wrong side, so the right sides are facing out for that cuff. And then I'm going to put that on the right side of the sleeve so that when it folds out, it will have a nice little cuff. And so for this one, because we're working with such stretchy material, I put the foot of my sewing machine down first and then put the needle down before taking that stretchy ribbed fabric and stretching it all the way across where it needs to fit. And this will make sure that it fits all the way across easily without having to kind of go back and forth and pin it while you're doing it. And then just a quick stitch down that sleeve cuff, and it's done. That's all you have to do for that first little cuff. I usually like to do a quick zigzag stitch just to make sure it's a little bit more sturdy and a little bit more finished, but that is up to you. And so this is what it should look like. You should be able to fold it up and have that nice little folded finished edge there, like, you know, you see on a sweatshirt or something of that nature. After you've repeated that on the other side, it's time to start attaching the sleeves to the body of the sweater. So as you can see on this pattern, there is a front and a back, and so you need to make sure you're lining up the right side of the sleeves to the correct one. So I always just double check which side is the various, like the A or B versus C and D, and then pin it to there. And so this is the reason why I think this is the easiest, most beginner-friendly sweater, because you don't have to worry too much with the sleeves. You don't have to worry about pinning or stretching or anything like that. It's just a quick little seam just like that along the side. And that is the front of your sleeve attached to the front of the sweater. And that's what's great about a raglan sleeve. It's just really, really easy to attach the sleeves on there, especially if you're not really familiar with doing sleeves, because doll sleeves can be a little bit more challenging because they are so small. And so in doing it this way, it kind of avoids that headache while you're still learning. And so at this point, I have sewn all of the sleeve seams together. So I have a nice little base of a sweater. If you open it up, it's starting to look a little bit more like a sweater now because all of those sleeves are attached all the way around. So what I'm doing now is getting lined up to sew the sides. So up the side of the body of the sweater, and then also the sleeves, kind of closing those up. And so I think the easiest way is just to pin all the way straight down from the cuff of the sleeve to the bottom of the sweater, making sure that you keep the armpit lined up nicely. You want to have it a nice little cross, so keeping the armpit seams lined up quite nicely. But other than that, it's really just going all the way down the sleeve and then down the side of it so that it is all connected. I'm using a lot of pins here because I want to make sure that this stays very, very even. And so I usually start at the sleeve cuff first because that is the thickest part, and making sure that's really solidly on there, and then making sure there's no strange folds underneath as I sew down the body of the sweater. And then I have now finished both sides, and I also finished it with just a slight zigzag stitch. It's a little messy on the inside, but this is just for me, so it's okay. Now for the hardest part of this tutorial, we'll be sewing the hemline and the collar. And so this one's a little bit more difficult because you are going to be sewing more in a circle rather than just a straight line like in the previous parts, but once you get the hang of it, it's really not too bad. So I am sewing first I'm not sure whether I'm doing the hemline or the collar first. I believe this is the hemline along the bottom, and I just sew it together flat so that I can create kind of an even seam so that it's not too visible, unlike how I did for the sleeve cuffs. And so once I have that seam on there, I'm just going to fold it inside out and then fold it in half again with the seams together so that there's a nice finished edge on both sides of that little circle. And now attaching it to the sweater itself, I am going to line up, once again, right sides to right sides, and line up the seam on that little stretchy circle with the sweater itself, and pin it right there just because I feel like it looks a little bit cleaner to have the seam lines just kind of go together like that once it's finished. So I'm going to pin all the way around, and the way I think is easiest is I will stretch it all the way across the way that you kind of want it to sit. Just pull it all the way across like that, and wherever it sits on the sweater itself, you pin it there. And there is going to be a little bit of like bubbling and stuff because the material is not exactly the same in terms of stretchiness, but that will come out when you sew it because you're going to be holding it stretched out the way that you've been pinning it when you are sewing it. So don't worry if once you let go of the pins, it does kind of scrunch back together again. We will be sewing it like that in just a moment. So once again, like with the cuff line, I am going to put the foot down and then put the needle down so that I can stretch out that material flat the way that I want it to sit. And this is going to be a little bit of a slow and steady process. You can't just do it in one fell swoop like you could maybe with some of the other steps. So what I do is I stretch it out like that and do a portion of it. And then I stop, make sure my needle is down so it doesn't move around at all. Take out some of the pins from the previously done areas so they're not getting in the way of my sewing or in the thread. And I just continue to stretch it out as I go until I make it all the way back around to where I started. And so there is our nice finished bottom. You can turn it quickly inside out now just to make sure it looks the way that you want it to, but it should be a nice finished edge there. Now we're going to do the exact same steps for the collar. This one is just a little bit more challenging because it is smaller, so you will have to be a little bit more careful as you go since it is a smaller circle, but it's literally the exact same steps. So if you're able to get the hemline at the bottom, the collar should be no problem. Once again, just stretching that material across so that it matches, so that you have a nice round circle all the way around that collar. The only real challenge with sewing this one is to make sure that you don't get the sleeves or any of the other seams caught underneath while you're sewing, so just be very mindful of that and just flipping it around as you go to make sure nothing's underneath that you don't want it to be. And then also being careful with all of your seams to make sure you get all of them connected, because this is the final step, so you want to make sure you get everything connected very nicely so it's ready for your doll. And that is the last seam done. So now all that's left is to turn it inside out. And this is a great time to double check all of your seams, make sure there aren't any holes or anything. And you can just quickly hand stitch or do another quick pass with your sewing machine to fix any spots that you might not be completely happy with. And now all that's left is to try it on your doll. So I'm grabbing my Minifee Mirwen Sasha, taking off the sweater she has on right now, to try on her sweater to make sure it fits right. It should pull right over her head. I take off her hands and head for ease of getting on, but I have heard that some people are able to get it on over the head depending on their doll size. But for me, I like to take off the doll's head just to make it a little easier. And as you can see, it fits quite nicely. Just pulls right over and is a nice, just comfy, loose sweater that she can just wear with her little jeans. I really like the way this sweater looks. I love how easy it is to make, and I just think it's a really great option for someone who wants to get started with doll sewing but doesn't want anything too challenging. And there she is. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Please leave in the comments down below if you used it to do a doll sweater yourself. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see any more tutorials for face-ups, for sewing. I do a whole lot of stuff on this BJD channel, and if you want to support me, check out my Patreon and my Instagram. I'll see you guys next time. Bye everyone.